the Misfits, 3 people who got thrown into the supernatural world of the Order and everything that surrounds it forcefully. They were normal humans beforehand. They became bounty hunters and actually resent the Order for who they are. This chapter revolves around one of the trio, aka Logan. He has a sword called the X-Reaper, which is the brother to the Excalibur. The X-Reaper can absorb souls, and you can spend the souls to allow the sword to do special things. So let's dive in and find out what Logan's been up to. In The Misfits, Chapter 2, Brawling in the Basement.
Don't quit doing what you're doing, 'cause you're different. I know people say that you're a misfit, but that's the thing I like about you. Don't listen to all the craziness that they can spit in. You know better than to try to fit in. That's the thing I like about you. That's the thing I like about you.
I woke up and I climbed out of bed, and I checked my phone. There was a message with the details of my so-called employee. I got dressed and suited up for my upcoming mission. Then I held my hand out and my sword disappeared off the wall and appeared in my hand. I attached my sword onto my back and walked out. There I saw Dante and Sophia leaving their apartments as well. "Aight?" Dante asked with a tired look on his face. "Morning," I nodded. "Guess I'll see you boys tonight," Sophia grinned. Then we all walked out and headed our own separate ways. I headed down into town and walked into a debt collection agency. A rather large woman sat there at the reception, typing away at her computer. "What's up, sweetheart?" she asked me in a gruff voice. "I hear you have a rat problem," I stated, copying exactly what I needed to say from the message on my phone. The woman looked up at me, then her eyes widened as she clocked my gear. She nodded and climbed out of her chair. She walked up with her keys and walked out of the reception cubicle. She led me down a corridor. Then she unlocked a specific door and opened it. She took a step back and gestured me to walk down the stairs. "Down there," she grunted. I nodded and I walked down the steps. The door closed behind me. I rolled my eyes and got to the bottom. There I saw the basement, filled with big purple rat-like demons, size of badgers. I pulled my sword off my back, and one of the demonic rats clocked me and ran at me at full speed. Its teeth were oversized for its own mouth, and were very thick as a brick. It jumped towards me, and I swung my sword, slicing the rat clean in half. In midair, both pieces flew behind me and hit the stairs. Then more of them clocked me, and they all ran at me at once. One jumped and snapped its teeth at me. I then stabbed it in the head and it died. Then I ran my fingers over my blade. "Soul sacrifice! Breath of the blue dragon!" I called out. The number on my handle went down by 1 as the blade was wrapped in a veil of blue flame. Then more rats ran at me and I jumped into the ground. I ran into the group of demonic rats as they jumped all over me. I swung my blade and sliced through the rats, blood and guts exploding everywhere, covering me and the floor. I managed to rip through the group of rats within a couple of minutes. I stood there victorious. The blue flames of my sword diminished. Then I dragged my feet through the corpses and started to climb the stairs, when suddenly I could hear gargling noises. I turned around to see some of the body parts sewing themselves back together, building the rats back. There were less of them this time round, and their numbers were less, but their size was bigger. "Oh, come on," I muttered. The bigger rats started to charge at me. I jumped over one and landed. Then I killed the first rat. Then the second one ran at me and I killed that one as well. I stood there and watched as the guts and corpses formed back into bigger rats, this time with lesser numbers. "Oh, damn it," I groaned. This time there was only 3 rats left. But this time there was the size of big cats. Then the 3 big rats charged at me. I swung my sword up and sliced the first rat clean in half. My sword got stuck in its rib cage. It seemed as if their bodies gotten stronger as they got bigger. I forced my sword and it got through the rib cage of the rat and clean cut it in half, slicing it into two. Then the second one came at me and bit into my leg. It sank its teeth into my calf and I grunted in pain. I ran the tip of my sword into its head, making it loosen its grip with its jaw. Then the third one jumped at me. I jumped up into the air. I spun around and sliced the rat, chopping its head off. Then I landed. I looked down and saw my gear had been soaked in blood. I grunted in disgust. Then the guts formed up again into one giant rat and it overtowered me. Fuck this, I barked. I then ran my fingers across my blade once more. Soul sacrifice! Slicing wind! I called out. Then the blade of my sword shattered into pieces. The shards floated there, and I aimed the handle of my sword at the big rat. The shards flew at the rat, and all stabbed into it. It rolled out in pain. Then I ran up the rat's body, and jumped off of its body, launching myself into the air. I spun the sword handle, and the shards extracted from the body of the rat, then flew up and circled around the rat. I then landed and swung the handle down as hard as I could. All the shards that were in the air flew into the rat's head. The rat started to gargle and fell to the floor dead. Much better, I muttered under my breath as the shards all returned to the handle and the sword was reformed back into the blade once more. I looked at the handle and the 3 zeros stared back at me. I need to collect some souls, and quick. I sighed to myself. I walked up the stairs and left the basement. The large woman sat at the reception, looked at me with wide eyes as I walked past. I don't think she was expecting me to be covered in demon guts. I left the building and headed for Chinatown. The place was really well for demonic beings and humans to mingle. The best place for most criminal activities that included both factions to happen. I walked into a bar and ordered a drink. I then stood there at the end of the bar and watched the folks mingle with different demons. Then I saw a man move ever so sketchy away from the bar and to the back of the building. I downed my drink and followed him. I kept my distance, so I stayed hidden. I walked into the back room and found a large demon being milked for its blood. It was tied to the wall with massive needles, and the blood was being poured into a huge bong. The man joined other men. There was now 5 of them. They all grabbed a nozzle and placed it into their mouths. They pressed the switch. The vase of demon blood started to boil. Then they all pulled a drag into their mouths and inhaled the steam. They all exhaled and started to get comfy. They were getting stoned off demon blood. I walked up to them, shaking my head. I took the sword off my back and I walked up to the first guy and the man that I followed, and I swung my sword and beheaded the guy instantly. The other 4 guys jumped up out of their chairs. I stabbed the second one in the chest. He dropped to the floor. I then grabbed the third guy, headbutted him in the head, and then stabbed him into the stomach. He dropped to the floor dying. Then I flicked my sword and sliced the 4th man's throat. He dropped to the floor, clenching his neck. Then the 5th guy tried to run away, but stumbled forward. I jumped up and tackled him to the ground. I raised my sword up and plunged the tip into the man. Then I stood and twisted the bottom of my handle of the sword and pulled out a small red crystal and held it up into the air. Feed, ex-reaper, I called out, and suddenly 5 souls appeared and was absorbed into the crystal. I then placed the crystal into the handle and twisted it back into it, and then the 3 zeros turned into the number 5. Then I turned to the demon tied to the wall. Help me, it shrieked. I walked up to it and stabbed it in the head. Its tense body went limp. Then I left the room. I walked through the bar without a second thought, and I left. I walked out and headed to the crime house. I entered Richard's office. Well done, my boy. I am friends with the owner, and he was having some trouble with those pesky demons. No trouble, huh? Richard sneered through his cigar. I guess. I mean, they could reform, but I used my brain, I told him. Good to know you have one, boy. Richard chuckled. He then threw a stack of money at me. Thanks, I said. Then I walked out and I headed home. I got home and knocked on Dante's door, but I had no reply. Then I knocked on Sophia's door, and I again was met with no response. I then walked into my apartment. I stripped off my gear and cleaned it. I sat on my bed with the X-Reaper. I pulled out a specific black stone and started gliding it across the blade. Small sparks flickered off of it. I sat there sharpening my sword with the overwhelming thought that someone was watching me. Something dark. I peered over my shoulder just to make sure that no one else was in the room. I shook my head and carried on sharpening my sword, hoping Sophia and Dante would be home soon. And there you have it, guys. Chapter 2 of The Misfits. Hope you guys enjoyed this chapter. An intense chapter as you get to see one of the missions for Dante. Now, I look forward to updating this story, and again, this does take place in The Order, a specific, unique storyline made by Cosplay 267. We are 2 of the 3 Ranger Bros, the 3rd member being Mark the Red Cornish Ranger with his podcast Nursery Comics, so make sure you check him out. Cosplay Dude also got some other podcasts as well. Power Rangers Universe 19, Sailor Moon 8, and a YouTube channel called Nostalgia Time, so you might want to go check all them out as well. Of course, we're in association with Zero to Hero, a fun podcast all around Power Rangers and other fun things like that, so make sure you go listen to them. Don't forget to subscribe to Tiger Tales, the other story channel that I have, which I upload more storylines and fan fictions in the 3rd person perspective. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you all for watching, and of course, I shall see you guys really soon.